countdown to Election Day. With November 5th just around the corner, the presidential candidates are hitting stages in swing states.
No one trusts her. No one takes her seriously.
And bringing out the big names in the race against time to firm up American support. With the end in sight, we look at the candidates' positions on crime and the economy and get an inside look at how this race and thousands of others across the country will be called. Welcome to PBS News Weekly. I'm Ali Rogan. We're less than 2 weeks away from Election Day, and the campaigns are sprinting towards the finish line. Former President Donald Trump began the week scooping French fries and serving fast food at a staged event at a Pennsylvania McDonald's. The visit followed accusations Trump made without evidence that Harris has lied about her college job at the fast food chain. Trump then traveled to North Carolina to see the aftermath of Hurricane Helene. There, Trump repeated baseless claims about the federal government's response to the disaster.
Certainly, you have all heard the same stories that we all hear, that FEMA has done a very poor job. They were not supposed to be spending the money on taking in illegal migrants, maybe so they could vote in the election.
Vice President Kamala Harris, meanwhile, kicked off her week with moderated conversations with former Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney, starting in Pennsylvania.
I've spent time working in countries where people aren't free and where people are struggling for their freedom. And I know how quickly democracies can unravel. But I tell you, again, as someone who has seen firsthand how quickly it can happen, that is what's on the ballot.
On Tuesday, Trump repeated attacks on his opponent's intelligence, criticizing Vice President Harris for not doing any public events that day, though she did film a few television interviews.
She's lazy as hell, and she's got that reputation. And there's something wrong with her, too. She's slow, low IQ, something. I don't know what the hell it is.
But on Wednesday, Trump faced blistering new criticism from his longest-serving chief of staff, John Kelly. In interviews with the New York Times and The Atlantic, Kelly said Trump had fascist tendencies and quoted the former president as once having said, "I need the kind of generals that Hitler had."
He commented more than once that, that Hitler did some good things too.
Harris, from the vice presidential residence, called Kelly's comments deeply troubling.
He wants a military who will be loyal to him personally, one that will obey his orders even when he tells them to break the law or abandon their oath to the Constitution of the United States.
And as her opponent took his campaign out west to Arizona and Las Vegas, the vice president rounded out the week with campaign events featuring performances by Bruce Springsteen, Beyoncé, and others. The economy and inflation are top priorities for voters, and on the campaign trail, Harris and Trump have highlighted their different approaches if elected. Our Laura Barone-Lopez joined Amna Nawaz to break down the candidates' plans.
So let's start with Vice President Harris then. Just walk us through the key points in her economic plans that she says will lower costs for everyday Americans.
So in addition to the capital gains tax she proposed, today she also announced that she wants to do a $50,000 tax deduction on expenses for small businesses. That's an increase in the tax break from $5,000 for startups. She also has a goal of 25 million new business applications in her first term were she to win. And this builds on other key proposals that she's already outlined as early as last month of her economic proposals that include the construction of 3 million new housing units, $25,000 down payment assistance for first-time homebuyers, a federal ban on price gouging food and groceries, and she wants to raise the corporate tax rate from 21% to 28%. She also wants to permanently expand the child tax credit to $6,000 for middle and low-income families for the first year of their child's life. And she's also made the promise that President Biden made, which was to not raise taxes on people making less than $400,000 a year. So ultimately, a lot of her proposals are very similar to President Biden's.
What about when you compare them to former President Trump? How do they differ?
Economic policy is not necessarily a regular part of Donald Trump's stump speech, but Donald Trump has claimed that he plans to fix inflation on day one.
On my first day back in the Oval Office, I will sign an executive order directing every cabinet secretary and agency head to use every tool and authority at their disposal to defeat inflation and to bring consumer prices rapidly down. It will be a whole of government effort to raise the standard of living and make American life affordable again.
Donald Trump has provided little specifics on how exactly he would lower inflation, but here's what we do know about his economic policy. He said that he wants to cut taxes for corporations, lowering the rate from 21% to 15%, eliminate taxes on tips and Social Security benefits, institute a 10 to 20% tariffs on all foreign goods with an extra focus on China, imposing tariffs of 60% on Chinese imports. And he wants to make those 2017 tax cuts permanent, Amna. Those 2017 tax cuts, which saw the corporate rate be implemented at 21% and individual tax cuts across all earners, especially top earners. Those tax cuts are going to expire next year, so he wants to make them permanent.
So when you take a step back here, big picture, when you compare what we see is the Harris vision and the Trump vision, what are sort of the key differences here?
The biggest differences are on their housing, taxes, tariffs, and mass deportation of migrants proposals when it comes to how it will impact the economy. My producer, Shrey Poppet, and I spoke to multiple economists, including Mark Zandi, who's the chief economist at Moody's. And Zandi joked that you put 10 economists in a room and they'll come out with 20 opinions. But overall, he cited warnings from 16 Nobel laureate economists saying that that Trump's plans would increase inflation, and that's also what Moody's found.
I think President Trump's policies would lead to a somewhat diminished economy, not a recession, but a diminished economy, slower growth, somewhat higher unemployment, but ultimately higher inflation and higher deficits and debt. And if you're a high-income household, a high-net-worth household, you'll certainly do better under President Trump. But I think if you're a kind of a middle-income American, you're a lower-income American, you'll do better under President Harris.
One of the similarities, Mark Zandi said, is that proposal to eliminate taxes on tips that both have said they want to do. But a lot of the economists say that people who necessarily rely on tips for their well-being don't pay that much in taxes to begin with, so they question the impact.
So as you talk to the experts and they look at both sets of policy proposals, what do they say could be the biggest impacts of those proposals?
One of the proposals that multiple economists raised was Trump's plan for mass deportations of millions of undocumented migrants. J.D. Vance, his running mate, has said that that plan is their housing plan, that ultimately U.S. citizens are fighting for housing with U.S. migrants, and that deporting millions of migrants could make housing more affordable. We spoke to Michael Strain, who's an economist at the conservative American Enterprise Institute, and he said that that proposal would be detrimental to the economy.
What that would do would be to remove, hundreds of thousands, maybe even more undocumented workers from workplaces. When you walk into the grocery store, the price of fresh produce would go up, the price of renting a hotel room would go up, the price of a restaurant meal would go up. Maybe the price of home construction.
Strain said ultimately the way to fix the housing crisis is to build more homes. But also when it comes to impacts, Amna, the nonpartisan Penn Wharton budget model conducted an analysis of both the candidates' proposals and found that Trump's proposals increase the national debt more than $5 trillion over 10 years. By comparison, Harris's plan would add over $1 trillion over the same amount of time.
All right, Laura Barone-Lopez with a look at both candidates' proposals here. Laura, great reporting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Gun violence and crime in America are also key issues this election. Lisa Desjardins spoke to Jeff Bennett about where the candidates stand.
Let's start with former President Donald Trump. He talks often about crime despite his own felony convictions. What's his plan to address crime in America?
Trump's approach is blunt and it focuses on enforcement. Here is what he said to the National Rifle Association in May.
We have become a drug-infested, crime-ridden nation, which is incapable of solving even the simplest of problems. We will institute the powerful death penalty for drug dealers, where each dealer is responsible for the death during their lives of at least 500 people or more.
Trump has given a few other details about this. Without the music, we can look at it a little more specifically. First, to do this, he would require that police forces, in order to get federal funding, employ stop and frisk. That is that police method which looks at people that police believe are suspicious, and they would pat them down to try and find weapons or guns or drugs. It's a controversial program. He would require it in order to get federal funding. He also would have a crackdown on illegal drugs. To do that, as he said, he would invoke a death penalty, he says, on drug dealers. He hasn't given other specifics, and human traffickers. We don't know exactly what that means, but that's as severe of a penalty as you can have. It's in contrast, though, to when he was president. At that time, he signed the First Step Act. That's something that actually reduced the punishments and sentences for some nonviolent drug offenders, including traffickers, and he personally pardoned or commuted the sentences for dozens of drug traffickers.
So what about Vice President Harris, former prosecutor, former state attorney general? What's her approach?
Let's talk especially about policing and Vice President Kamala Harris. Her opponents accuse Harris of wanting to defund the police, but she has never used that phrasing. Instead, she's really carefully walked this line, sometimes in a vague way. So let's go back to 2020. After the death of George Floyd, Harris then said that, in fact, she thought there should be a reimagining of public safety, more resources for education, for housing, for community development. She did say at that time, in her opinion, it was right to question the size of police budgets. Now, while in the White House, she has pushed for more community intervention funding. At the same time, as the issue of crime has risen while she's been in the White House, the Biden and Harris administration has also pushed for more funding for police. Now, that includes things like police detectives, forensics, and also some prosecutors as well, her specialty. One of her key advisors has said that that's not in conflict, that both can happen, that you can increase funding for the police but also push for reform. What reforms does she want exactly? She hasn't specified. But Harris's main focus in terms of solving crime as a candidate is about prevention, especially about gun violence.
Well, let's talk more about that. What are the candidates saying about what they would do if elected about this issue of gun violence in particular?
Right, let's start with Harris because it really is central to what she is saying as a candidate. Here is something she said at an event just yesterday.
I'm in favor of the Second Amendment, and I believe we need to reinstate the assault weapons ban and pass universal background checks, safe storage laws, and red flag laws. When we took office, we promised to take on the crisis of gun violence, and we passed, under the president's leadership, the first major gun safety law in nearly 30 years.
That bipartisan law actually extended some the background checks, and it closed some loopholes. Now, in addition to that, as you heard Harris say, she would ban assault-style weapons. She would also ban high-capacity magazines. Those are things we know often are used, especially in mass shootings in this country. But she would also extend more background checks and red flag laws. She wants also more community intervention, as I mentioned. And talking to expert staff, that's something that they say already has had a positive impact, that gun violence they see is being affected in a positive way downward because of community intervention. As for former President Trump, he says repeatedly on the trail, he wants to protect gun rights. He opposes bans on assault-style weapons, on high-capacity magazines. But otherwise, honestly, he hasn't given many details this cycle. So if you go back a little bit and look at him as president, there's a mixed record for him on guns. One is that he asked that bump stocks be declared illegal. It was later overturned by the Supreme Court, but that was something in the direction of gun control. Otherwise, he moved to water down or sometimes completely rewrite federal gun regulations.
And returning to this issue of crime, it might be a resonant political issue, but do a fact check because crime rates in this country have actually come down.
Right. We hear this again and again, especially from Trump and Republicans. There were new figures out just today, or just this week, rather, from the FBI. Today, Attorney General Merrick Garland said that crime rates have gone down to almost their lowest level in 50 years. What does that mean? Well, violent crime nudged down from last year to this year, and especially murders and manslaughters down 12%.
Lisa Desjardins, thanks so much. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
News outlets like ours rely on race ratings to track political contests across the country, including the presidential race. But what exactly are those ratings? For insights, we spoke to a familiar face here at PBS News, Amy Walter of the Cook Political Report with Amy Walter.
So the Cook Political Report race ratings have actually been around for about 40 years. And what they are is they're basically a measurement of the competitiveness of a race. A congressional race for the House, the Senate, governors, and then for the presidential, each one of the states or the state's congressional districts. We use them to help guide our subscribers into understanding what the political playing field looks like. Which races do we think are the ones that are most likely to be competitive? Which ones are more likely to be leaning to the favor of one party or the other? So a toss-up race is considered the absolute most competitive. It's so competitive that it could literally go either way. The Democrat could win, the Republican could win. It's too close. We're not going to be able to tell you who's favored here. A race that's described as leaning, either leaning Republican or leaning Democrat, there we think, based on all those factors I put in front of us, the competitiveness of it, while competitive is still leaning in favor of one side or the other. Now, that doesn't mean the candidate that is not favored or the party that's not favored automatically loses. We just think they have an advantage. Category after that is likely. And the reason we have that category, so it's considered not as competitive, but these are the places where sometimes you see an upset. You can see the makings of a race that may end up surprising folks. It's just not quite there yet. Or it's the amount of money or attention this district is getting is impacting the way that voters perceive this contest. A likely category is one that we are keeping our eye on. And then finally, we have the solid category, and those are races where we think one party has the overwhelming advantage. So there's not a magic formula for how we determine whether a race is listed in one category or another, but we take a number of things into consideration. The first is the makeup of the state or the district. We know, especially when it comes to the House, there are 435 districts, but so many of them are overwhelmingly Republican or Democrat. They're just not going to be competitive. So we look at that, vote history. Then we look at the incumbent, or if it is an open seat, the incumbent retired. What would that mean? Is the incumbent in a good place? Are they politically under fire for something that they've done? Say there's a scandal of some sort. If it's an open seat race, does not having that incumbent actually help one party or the other? We look, of course, at polling. This is especially true in the bigger races where you have a lot more public polling. We talk to lots and lots of people who are in that district, people who are political operatives. Maybe they're working for the Democrat, maybe they're working for the Republican. We speak to everybody who's involved in that race. And we come up with a scale of competitiveness. The other thing that I think is really important to appreciate is that we do have ratings. We don't give a percentage, say, chance that one side or the other is going to win. Or we don't say, this is definitely going to happen. What we're trying to do is really put some structure into what can feel like a pretty chaotic process.
On November 5th, there will be one big question on everyone's minds: who won? But to find out, votes actually have to be counted and race calls made. Lisa Desjardins recently visited the Associated Press for a closer look at how that organization tracks votes and declares winners in elections across the nation.
For decades, PBS News and hundreds of other news outlets have relied on the Associated Press to count votes and call winners.
And we're hitching our wagon to the AP.
Key race lists are completed.
It is a monumental task. This year on election night, the AP's team of journalists will track over 5,000 competitive races: president, Congress, mayors, and many, many more.
We like to call it the single biggest act of journalism there is.
David Scott is the AP's Vice President of News Strategy and Operations. He oversees the election team.
Our number one most important goal on election night is to be 100% right in our race calls.
100%.
That's our standard. We do care about speed, but only as a secondary factor. It's, never compromise on the accuracy in an effort to be faster.
The AP has been counting the vote for 175 years, including when vote totals from some places were sent back on horseback.
We are really, really proud of the role that we play in the democracy.
And we got votes.
We watched the process at the AP's Washington Bureau on one of the final primary nights of this year.
There's usually a rhythm in it. It usually starts off slow.
In a quiet corner of the mostly empty newsroom, The election team was keeping track of about 3 dozen races in just one state, deciding when to call a winner in each.
The check mark. There it goes.
But on general election night, this newsroom will be filled, handling a slate of races 150 times larger. No matter the scale, the fundamentals remain the same.
We'll get to a certain point where we actually get a model recommendation.
The AP calls races when it is certain that statistically only one person can win.
We're looking to know one thing. Can the trailing candidates catch up? And once we're certain that they can't, then that's when we call the race.
That real-time call takes months of planning, years of experience, and data. Lots and lots of data.
I see it flashing green too. Does that mean you're getting updated votes at that point? Okay.
Starting with the official vote count. That's the actual tally in each race. With tens of thousands of polling places across the country, yeah, it is a big job.
We will have people in place at county election offices, so it's about 4,000 reporters out across the country. And that's just one of the ways that we collect the vote. We also take in data feeds, we're scraping websites, we're looking at websites and manually entering them. We're always looking to get the vote count from as many sources as we can and never from just one source.
Some places would rather you get it off their website.
But as the numbers come in, the AP also needs to figure out how many votes are left to be counted. How close is this to a final result?
Less than 1% of the vote counted.
To do that, the AP carefully estimates the total number of ballots expected to be cast in each state. As voting methods have shifted, this has become trickier. 30 years ago, fewer than 1 in 10 voters cast their ballot before Election Day. That number grew steadily until the pandemic upended the 2020 election, and nearly 70% of votes were cast early, either in person or by mail. Polls suggest half of voters may do the same this year.
We're looking at how many people are registered. We're looking at what was the turnout in the past comparable election. We're looking at how many advance votes are already in the ballot box, information we get from a lot of states. And we sort of plug that all into a model where we are trying to estimate how much vote has been cast.
So in real time, you can adjust.
Absolutely.
Is this going to be a bigger election than we thought or smaller?
Right. And then once polls close and we actually start getting ballots in, those actual returns feed into the model as well, and we make adjustments. So you'll see that estimate change over the course of the night. That's not a problem. That's us adjusting to the data.
Further complicating the process, states count and release different types of votes in different order. In Battleground Arizona, they start counting mail votes as they're returned, but they don't start releasing results until an hour after polls close. In Pennsylvania, early ballots are not processed at all until Election Day. In New Hampshire, they aren't counted until after polls close.
You're looking for patterns on election night when we're calling races. Are there a class of early ballots that have yet to be counted? And what do we expect those early ballots to say about the course of the election? If we had to wait for 100% of all ballots to be counted, we wouldn't know what has taken place in an election for weeks after Election Day.
If the presidential race is close, as many expect it to be, it may still take days to know the winner, just like it did in 2020.
It says it's a 0% confidence score. What does that mean?
That means that we're not ready to call it.
As the AP Decision Desk works to call the race as quickly as possible, all the data flow into a computer model.
Starting to get a pretty good pattern.
But it's still analyzed by real people.
And you see no way that the other candidates could win? With what you see?
No.
Those observers have added data from another unique way the AP gets election information, its VoteCast system. That is, voter surveys of more than 120,000 people across all 50 states. The AP survey is an update and twist on traditional exit polls, where someone would stand outside of polling places and ask people who they voted for. AP now accounts for people who vote early or by mail, or who stay home entirely. To do that, the VoteCast team conducts surveys online and on the phone all the way up to when polls close. The data help explain who voted and why.
We're able to analyze smaller slices of the electorate with a margin of error that means we can act on it. So we're able to look at Hispanic voters or African American voters or young voters, but then also combinations of those voters in a way that helps us potentially get to a race call sooner or understand the way that the electorate is shaping up in a level of detail that didn't exist before.
All that, 4,000 reporters getting real-time results, months of estimating the likely turnout, and surveys of over 100,000 people. It all leads to the big moment and the actual race call.
They're doing it right now.
David and his team weigh in, then the major calls, including for president in close states, go to the desks of executive editor Julie Pace and Washington bureau chief Anna Johnson.
We'll make sort of that final sign-off to say, yes, let's go with it. Or, often we have some questions, some things we want to answer. Have we considered this? Have we looked at that? But ultimately, it's, to say yay or nay, we're ready to go. What kind of pressure do you feel? There's ultimately a lot of pressure in it. On the other hand, we know we're right. We know that information is correct. Our goal then is just to get it out to the world.
In those moments, even on a busy general election night, the crowded newsroom can feel as small as it was for a single state's primary election.
And most of those times, it's fairly calm. And I think there's just a lot of focus in those moments. So it's quiet? It can be actually somewhat quieter because, people realize we're in a moment and everyone needs to focus and keep, pay attention.
Focus and attention on the AP's biggest act of journalism, a responsibility grounded in a massive, careful, hands-on operation and a mission they take seriously, no matter which election they're watching or how long it takes to call the winner.
There's always a moment every general election where for a very small amount of time, you're the first person to know who's going to be the next president. You cherish that, and then you get down to business calling that race.
For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Lisa Desjardins at the AP Decision Desk in Washington.
That's it for this week's episode of PBS News Weekly. For all of us, thanks so much for watching.